Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Marcum's Learning Community on DC Paid Family Leave. As Erin stated, my name is Candace Griffith, and I am joined by my colleagues Christine Machado, Angela Butler, and Hannah Mohammed. We are part of the Managed Services and Consulting Department, specifically in Human Resources. We provide HR services in 3 specific delivery methods, which are outsourcing and co-sourcing, projects, and interim services. So we'll get started with the presentation.
Katie, I just wanted to note really quick for the attendees, I did forget to mention about questions, that we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to type them into the chat box in your WebEx tool panel. You are able to change it to be sent just to the presenters versus all the participants if you prefer. And we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end. And if we're not able to make it, if it's past our time, then we can email those answers out to you after. So I apologize.
Great, thank you. So a little overview of the program content. We're going to be talking about the overview of DC Paid Family Leave, DC Paid Family Leave wages, coordination with other benefits and policies, next steps for you and your organization, how Marcum can help. We're going to have an FAQ section, a scenario section, questions, additional resources, and then lastly, as we mentioned, the CPE credit slide. Next slide, please. The learning objectives for today are for the participants to have a better understanding of DC Paid Family Leave and how to prepare their organization to implement this act. So next up, we have my colleague Angela Butler, who's going to begin with the overview of DC Paid Family Leave.
Thanks, Candace. Thanks, everyone, for attending. We are going to give you an overview of what the DC Paid Family Leave is and how it affects your organization. Basically, the DC Department of Employment Services has opened a new office called the Office of Paid Family Leave, and the sole purpose of this office is to administer this new program. This is a paid leave program for your employees who work in DC, and it's going to provide time off for parental leave, family leave, or personal medical leave. And as you can see on the slide, each of those leaves has a different amount of paid leave attached to it. This is it's a way for employees to get paid leave if they don't currently have paid leave with their employers, or to supplement the paid leave that they already have. And this is going to be paid for by employer taxes, 100% by employer taxes. Employees do not have to contribute anything to be eligible for this paid leave. And basically the formula for this is going to be 0.62% of your employee salaries you're going to pay in taxes quarterly. So some things to kind of look at as to when this all starts. We're basically already started. In July, when you pay your second quarter taxes for 2019, you're going to be paying the 0.62% for the paid leave tax for April, May, and June. July 1st of 2020, so not this year, but a full year after you start paying the taxes, this is when employees can start applying for and using this paid leave benefit. If you have employees that are currently asking you questions about the DC Paid Family Leave, what they need to know is that more information for them will be forthcoming as we get closer to the July 1st, 2020 date, and that information will come from the Department of Paid Leave. So we mentioned that there's 3 different types of leave, just to kind of define what those are. And for those of you who have experience with either federal FMLA or DC FMLA, some of this is going to sound really familiar to you because it kind of follows the same line. So the first type of leave that allows 8 weeks of paid leave, and this is the most that under the paid leave law that employees can have, the 8 weeks. This can be used when there's a qualifying event, like an employee has a baby, or an employee wants to adopt a child or become an official foster parent for a child. The third bullet point can be a little bit confusing, but what this means is that a child is placed with them, and it's not usually done through an agency, but it's done through legal means. So let's say you have an employee who's a grandmother and her daughter can no longer, for whatever reason, can no longer care for her children, and the grandmother wants to legally take possession of the children and become those children's guardian and primary caregiver. The third bullet point would cover this. So in that situation, your employee would be entitled to up to 8 weeks for parental leave. The next type of leave would be family leave, and there are 6 weeks of paid leave allowed with this. This is used when there is some kind of diagnosis or there's a serious health condition where a family member needs some help or some care. And what do we mean by family member? DC has defined family member as either children, parents, spouse or domestic partner, grandparents are covered, and then also siblings. So if you have an employee that needs to care for one of their family members, they will have the ability to apply for 6 weeks of paid leave under the new DC law. The medical leave option, which pays up to 2 weeks, this is when an employee has his or her own serious health condition or injury that would fall under this. So in HR, we always seem to throw around different terms. One of those terms is serious health condition. What exactly does that mean? A serious health condition is when your employee has an illness or an impairment, either physical or mental, that really prohibits them from being able to care for themselves or to be they need to be under the care of a doctor. This can either happen either inpatient, whether it be a hospital or some other type of treatment facility, or it can be where they are at home under doctor's orders and they have, the notes that we all ask for where they can't return to work for a certain time. Those things all fall under a serious health condition. So some things to think of are things that sometimes we wouldn't think of them as a serious health condition. And one of those things are, we all know that the weight loss surgeries, the bands and things like that, those things are becoming more and more popular with some people. The actual act of having the weight loss surgery, because it's voluntary, wouldn't be a serious health condition, but the recovery afterwards does fall under serious health condition. So some things to think about when your employee comes to you and says, I have this thing going on, and some things that you should be asking or having your HR person ask to see if this qualifies for a serious health condition. And a lot of you are probably saying, does this really apply to me? And really the short answer is yes. If you are operating in a business type capacity in DC and you have any number of employees, this regulation is going to apply to you. If you have an employee that's spending, and we'll get a little bit more into this later in the presentation, but more than 50% or 50% or more of their time in DC performing business transactions, this is going to apply to you. It does include nonprofits. We get a lot of questions from our clients because most of our clients are nonprofits. Does it really include me? Yes, you are going to be responsible for the 0.62% in taxes, and your employees are eligible to participate. And just to kind of hit it home, the size of the employer really doesn't matter. If you have one employee, that employee is covered. And how does it really impact you? So the biggest impact to you, well, there's going to be two. One are the taxes that you're going to pay, and the other is your employee is going to be eligible to take leave. So for the taxes, and we're going to keep saying this throughout the presentation, it's 0.62% of employees' salary. Now, these are all of your employees, and it's all of their salaries. So there's no cap on it, like for your Social Security tax and things like that, there's a cap. If you have an employee making $300,000, all $300,000 of that employee's salary is going to be subject to those 0.62% of taxes. This DC paid family leave can run concurrently with leave policies that you already have in place. And by that, what I mean is if you already have paid time off, PTO, or if you have vacation or sick time, this can run concurrently. What you'll need to do is you'll need to take a look at your policies and see if they need to be written to say concurrent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. And when is this bill due? So the month of July, when you pay your second quarter taxes, is when you're going to pay the 0.62% for April, May, and June. And we'll talk about how you're going to pay this, but basically your current payroll company or your current payroll reports will be able to help you figure out how much you will be owing in taxes. So again, 0.62%, that is your magic number. And just to give you an example, if you have, for quarter two, if you pay $250,000 in total gross payroll dollars, that amount that's going to be due in July is $1,550. So you're going to take that gross amount, you're going to multiply it by 0.0062 or 0.62%, and that will give you the $1,550. DC paid family leave wages, basically when your employee wants to apply for this, and this is not going to be until next July, when your employee wants to apply for this, they are going to need to follow a claim or an application with the Office of Paid Leave within 90 days of their qualifying event or their serious health condition. The benefit calculations are going to be based on an average weekly wage. And that max weekly benefit is going to be $1,000 up to 90% wage replacement. So when an employee comes to you next July and says, hey, I'm going to have a baby or I need to have surgery, basically what's going to happen is there will be a website that the employee can go to, and they will log on and they will be able to fill in all of their information. That shoots off to the Office of Paid Family Leave, and they review the case and make the decision. Now, what also should happen on your end as an employer is if you have something like short-term disability insurance, what you'll want to do is talk with that employee and see and get them also to complete those types of paperwork so that you can get that into your carrier, because they will qualify, most likely will qualify for both. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, my colleague, who is going to talk about how this coordinates with other benefits and policies.
Well, thank you very much, Angela. That was a lot of information on the DC paid family leave. And now I'll take that information and talk more about the other benefits and policies we already have in place and how they kind of interplay with each other. So the first one we will tackle is the DC paid family leave and DC FMLA and FMLA. I'm going to start by giving you guys a crash course on both the types of leaves before we kind of see how they coordinate with each other. So the DC FMLA, it is the District of Columbia Family and Medical Leave Act, and this Leave Act must provide the employees 16 weeks of unpaid medical leave for employees' own serious medical condition and 16 weeks of unpaid family leave for family members' serious medical condition or the birth or adoption of a child. For employers to be eligible for this DC FMLA, they must have 20 or more employees. And eligibility for employees is that they must be employed and working for 1 year or at least 1,000 hours within that 1 year. Employers do not have to pay out any unused leave upon termination. And also the other thing is that employees can choose to substitute any available paid leave along with DC FMLA. What is FMLA? FMLA is the Family and Medical Leave Act, and this act provides 12 weeks of unpaid leave for your own or family member's serious medical condition or a birth or placement of a child. The eligibility for this is that employers must have 50 or more employees, and the eligibility for employees is that they must work for 1 year of employment and 1,250 hours. Again, also employers do not have to pay out any unused leave upon termination, and also employers are required to take available paid leave while on FMLA. So employees will need to use their other paid time off concurrently with FMLA. And how does this really work with DC paid family leave? DC paid family leave will run concurrently with DC FMLA or FMLA, so it is not in addition to. DC paid family leave applies to employers with fewer than 20 employees, whereas with DC FMLA, it's 20 or more, and FMLA is 50 or more. So with DC paid family leave, it really is any size of an employer or organization, the DC paid family leave will apply. The DC paid family leave also does not provide any additional job protection beyond what DC FMLA and FMLA already provides. And also that DC paid family leave is a paid leave versus DC FMLA and FMLA are protected leave, but it is unpaid. The next one we will look at is sick leave, and how does DC sick leave coordinate with DC paid family leave. So what is paid sick leave? It is the Accrued Sick and Save Leave Act. It really applies to all DC employers. The employee eligibility for this normally is 90 days of service based on your hours worked. Employers do not have to pay for unused leave upon termination, and accrued unused sick leave carries over to the next year. And the accruals are different according to the size of your organization. So if you have 100 or more employees, it's 1 hour per 37 hours worked for a maximum of 7 days per year. If you are an organization with 25 to 99 employees, it's 1 hour for 43 hours worked for a maximum of 5 days per year. What do you think? Fewer than 25 employees, it's 1 hour for 87 hours worked for a maximum of 3 days per year. So how does this coordinate with DC paid family leave? DC paid family leave is likely in addition to your sick leave and not in lieu of. And employees can use their sick leave during the waiting period to determine eligibility for DC paid leave or after they have used DC paid family leave, so it does not need to run concurrently. The next one we'll cover is ADA, and ADA is the American Disabilities Act. And what is the American Disability Act? It really is an act that prohibits discrimination against individuals that have any sort of disability and gives them any reasonable accommodation to make sure that they are able to do all their functions of their job. So some types of reasonable accommodations, and to give you some examples of that, would be, providing or modifying any equipment or devices, any type of job restructuring in terms of, providing flexible hours, if there's a reassignment of any other positions of such. Those are all examples of reasonable accommodation. And how does that play with DC paid family leave? Well, one of the main reasons is that once your DC paid family leave has been exhausted, the employers are still obligated to provide ADA for the employee. And let's give you an example. You have an employee who comes to you and says that they have diabetes, and with that, they must take an injection every time they are able to, or they are eating. And so you as an employer discuss this and, start an ADA file and determine that in order to provide a reasonable accommodation for this employee, we will allow the employee to take 15-minute breaks twice a day so that they're able to take their injections before any meal that they do eat. and also provide a mini fridge in their office or by their desk so that they can store these injections securely and safely by them, so it's easier to take. Then this person goes out on leave, and they're eligible for DC paid family leave, and they're out for 8 weeks, for example, and they come back because they had a birth of their child. Once they do come back, their DC paid family leave has been exhausted. However, you still must provide the ADA the reasonable accommodation of the 15-minute breaks twice a day that are paid, and the mini fridge by their desk for storing their injections. So this just is an example of how, regardless of DC paid family leave being exhausted or not, you still must continue to provide ADA. And the last type of benefit that we'll briefly cover is the DC unemployment and disability benefits. And this really means that if an employee is on long-term disability, they're not eligible for DC paid family leave. If they are on short-term disability, they are eligible for DC paid family leave. And if they're on DC unemployment, they're not eligible for DC paid family leave. So the most important thing to note here is the only time an employee is eligible to use DC paid family leave, it is when they are on short-term disability. And it would be, and I would advise for you to talk to your short-term disability brokers because they can actually help you offset the DC paid family leave. And now I'm going to hand it over to Candace, and she will review next steps and how Marcum can help with implementation of the DC paid family leave for your organization.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Next slide, please. Okay, next steps for your organization. The first one we're going to address is evaluating your payroll systems. Because the tax piece of this begins on July 1st of this year, with data collected for wages in the second quarter, that's April 1st through June 30th, 2019, we suggest each of the organizations to reach out to their payroll provider and confirm that they are set up for the compliance piece of this act, meaning taking the additional tax from the wages, and if they also submit your quarterly reports, doing that as well. The next one is evaluating your current leave policies. You'll want to understand how your current leave benefits cross over with DC paid family leave. Maybe you already have a leave benefit that is far richer than DCPFL. If so, you may want to consider revising your current policies, although you are not required to. The next one is evaluating your staffing and coverage. Each organization should have a plan in place should one of their employees have to go out for an extended period of time. You want to make sure that your managers and your department heads are aware and have a general plan in place for if an employee will be out, how will their work be covered. The next one is identifying a conspicuous place for the required posting. As the compliance piece of this act, you are required to have the required posting located in your office. We suggest the kitchen, a break room, or something like a bulletin board. Another piece of this is training your managers to ensure compliance. You'll also want to ensure that you go over DC paid family leave with your managers because they may be the first stop before HR that an employee may come to with questions, and you'll want to make sure that they know exactly how to direct them. Lastly, creating a communication piece for your employees. Because this is an additional benefit to employees, it's going to be foreign and something that they may be confused about, wondering how they interplay with your current leave policies. So you'll want to develop some type of training or communication piece on the DC paid family leave. Next slide, please. How Marcum can help. These are just 3 ways in which you can reach out to Marcum about DC paid family leave as it relates to your organization. We can help you review your leave policy and also recommend changes for your organization. We can also help you develop that communication piece that we talked about for your employees. Also, we can lead on-site training seminars at your organization. Next slide, please. Employer facts. So we're going to go over a couple of employer facts that we feel are relevant to each of the organizations. We mentioned this before, but you'll also find additional resources that include these employer facts as well as employee facts later in the presentation. Next slide, please. The first one is my business required to contribute to the Paid Family Leave Fund? The answer, as Angela said earlier, is yes. Any organization that performs services in the District of Columbia also pays unemployment tax and has their employees working for at least 50% of the time or more in the district are required to contribute to the fund. When do the contributions to the Paid Family Leave Fund begin? The contributions to the Paid Family Leave begin this year. As we stated, it's for the second quarter of 2019, so April 1 through June 30th, although the employees will not be able to receive the benefit until July 1st of 2020. What are the reporting requirements associated with the Paid Family Leave contributions? We recently received updated information about this. We thought there was going to be a separate quarterly report for DC Paid Family Leave, but it has been confirmed that they are going to use the same wage information similar to the UC30, which is the Unemployment Compensation Quarterly Reports. Lastly, how are benefit payments issued to my employees? The benefit payments are going to be issued to individuals directly from the Department of Employment Services. They've set up a specific Office of Paid Family Leave that will be administering this benefit.
So we are going to launch some polling questions. You're going to see about 4 polling questions. I'm going to open the poll now. And you'll just have a couple minutes. We just want to try and get a gauge of what who we have in the audience, and the presenters are going to go over the results. And just a quick reminder about if you have any questions, you can either type them into the question and answer field or into the chat box, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So we're just going to give a couple minutes for everybody to do the polling questions. And as a reminder, a copy of the PowerPoint will also be emailed to you post-event for reference as well. All right, great. So we are going to show the results and go over go over the polling questions.
Okay, so the first question, have your employees already started talking about this? And the majority of you have responded no, which is a little surprising. We've been hearing from different clients that their employees know about this and are asking questions. So it's going to get out there more and more that this is going to be in place for 2020. So the best, if an employee comes to you asking about it, the best response is that, paid leave doesn't actually start until July 2020. And as we get closer to that date, the Office of Paid Family Leave will start to release, what that would exactly entail for an employee to apply.
The next question is, does your organization already have a paid leave policy or, sick or vacation or PTO? And the majority of you guys said, yes, you guys do. And to that point, do you plan on coordinating those policies with your DCPFL and paid family leave? And I know there's a couple of mixed responses, so it is still early on, and what we advise you to do is really review those policies and see whether you want to make changes to it, leave it the same. And if you really are unsure and have more questions or want to learn more about it and see how to go about it, definitely Marcum and our HR Managed Services team can help you review your policies and provide some advice and recommendations on those to help you, and give you more clarity on how you can coordinate your current policies you have in place with DC Paid Family Leave.
Okay. Next polling question. Does your organization intend to cut back? And the majority of you are not sure yet. Again, this is just something to think about. The intent of the DC Paid Family Leave law is to give employees a little bit of cushion when they need to take leave for any of the qualified reasons. And so most employers that I've talked to, don't really know either, but they may or may not consider, just something to kind of keep in the back of your head as we learn more about this regulation and how we can administer it.
And the last polling question is, what is the size of your organization? It looks like we have a very mixed bag of results, but the point to this is that the DC Paid Family Leave applies to all organizations in the District of Columbia regardless of size. So even if you have 3 employees, you're still going to be paying into this contribution fund. And so now we're going to start with a lineup of different scenarios. We're going to go through each scenario and just give you a little bit of information about how these scenarios work. They're going to touch on some of the questions that we see you guys have been asking in the chat. And I'm going to let my colleague Angela start us off with the first one.
Okay, so scenario number 1. Basically, Alliance is a nonprofit organization with 60 employees. Alicia was on a DC FMLA and short-term disability in 2019 for the birth of a child, and her FMLA ended on June 28th of 2019. On July 3rd, 2020, she requests another leave of absence because she needs additional surgery. So which leaves and/or protections is Alicia entitled? And we'll give you a couple minutes or a little bit to think about that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the answer to this is Alicia would be eligible for federal FMLA, DC Paid Family Leave for up to 2 weeks, and possibly the organization's short-term disability. We don't know how long she's going to need to be out, for her surgery, and depending on her short-term disability waiting period for benefits, she may be eligible for some short-term disability from that carrier as well.
The next scenario we're going to talk about is Frogmore is a startup incorporated in June 4th, 2020. On July 1st, 2020, they have 3 employees: the president, director of sales, and an administrative assistant. The director of sales' wife has a baby on July 20, 2020. Which leave and or protection is the director entitled? So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to think about that. So the answer is DC paid family leave for up to 8 weeks, because this is for the director to bond with their new child. They would not be eligible for DC FMLA or FMLA because the company does not hit the threshold of 20 or more employees or 50 or more employees.
So the third scenario, Quick Draw Courier Service has 20 employees. Tim's wife had a baby and he took his full 16 weeks of DC FMLA. His first day back from his leave of absence is July 30th, 2020. On August 3rd, 2020, Tim's sister dies, and Tim and his wife become the legal guardian of Sam, Tim's 8-year-old nephew. Which leaves and or protections is Tim entitled? And for this one, Tim is going to be entitled to DC paid family leave for up to 6 weeks. So this would be, he is taking legal guardianship of someone, and this is covered under the parental leave of DC paid family leave.
Okay, scenario number 4. Twinkles and Sprinkles is a corner bakery employing 21 employees. Cornelia took 8 weeks of DC Family Medical Leave Act and short-term disability for chemotherapy and returned to work on September 29, 2020. In November of that same year, Cornelia has a reoccurrence of her cancer and needs to have surgery and additional chemotherapy. Which leaves and or protections is Cornelia entitled? We'll give you a few moments to think about this before we go over the answer. So the answer to this question is DC paid family leave for up to 2 weeks, possibly. We aren't for sure if she took that during her first leave. She will also be entitled to an additional 8 weeks of the DC Family Medical Leave Act, and she would also be eligible for short-term disability. Next scenario. Cornelia returns to work on January 5th, 2021, but still has 6.5 weeks of radiation therapy. She is able to schedule her appointments at 3 p.m. most days, but needs to leave work to attend. The other days she plans to take off. Which leaves and or protections is Cornelia entitled? We'll give you just a moment to think about the answer to this question. The answer to this question is that the organization would continue to schedule her accommodation under the American Disabilities Act that Hannah spoke to about the coordination with other leaves and benefits. Okay, now we're going to take questions. We see some of you have been asking questions in the Q&A section and chat. We're going to give you just another minute or two to think of some questions that you may have for us, and then we'll go ahead and start going down the list answering what we can. So now we're going to go through and answer some of the questions that you guys had. We see the first one says, is there an upper limit on the wages for this tax similar to state unemployment insurance wage limits? The answer to that question is no. There is no limit on the wages for this tax. The next question is, can we offset any paid benefits provided by the employer by the amount of benefit being provided by the paid family leave so the employee does not receive over 100%? The answer to that question is yes. That will be at the discretion of each employer, whether or not they want to do any supplementing of wages for that time, but that is not a requirement from the compliance piece of this act. We saw some people were asking about, will they get a copy of the presentation? We will be sending a copy of the presentation, but it's also available for download in the additional resources section. Another question is, what if you have remote workers outside of DC? Are they eligible? The compliance piece of this act only applies to employees who work 50% or more of their time in the District of Columbia. So if they're not working in DC for 50% or more, they would not be eligible for these benefits. That kind of tied into the next question. Do you pay the DCPFL tax on only those wages paid to employees who work and reside in DC, or to all employees regardless of place of residence? It does not matter if the employee resides in DC, Virginia, Maryland, or elsewhere. If they work 50% or more of their time in the District of Columbia and the employer pays state unemployment insurance tax on these employees, then the organization would have to pay into this and the employee would be eligible. We also see a question about, if this is covered in the presentation, how does the employer pay into the paid family leave when they are headquartered in DC, or in a different location, excuse me, but have a satellite office in DC with a handful of staff in the DC office? Again, just reminding that it's only if the organization has 50% or more, or if their employees are working 50% or more of their time in the District of Columbia. Another question, if an employee has accrued PTO as an employee benefit, do they need to first exhaust their PTO before submitting for the DC paid family leave? The answer to that question is no. That is not a requirement for DC paid family leave. Another question we see, are the contributions deducted from payroll, or do employers need to pay into a specific account? This question has a little bit to do about how you can better prepare your organization. You'll want to reach out to your payroll provider to make sure that they are set up to deduct the tax from the wages from your employer. The tax will be on the employee's wages for the quarter in question. So we talked about on July 1st of this year that employers were going to be responsible for that first contribution, and that was going to be for their employees' wages from April 1st through June 30th of this year.
There is a question in regards to DC FMLA. It says, is this 20 employees in DC office or 20 employees total? Again, taking into consideration that DC is a satellite office, DC FMLA really only applies if you have 20 or more employees in DC. So if you have 10 here and 30 in another state, then DC FMLA does not apply to those employees in your DC office. So another question is, under what circumstances would an employee apply for DC paid family leave and not receive it? You know, that really is up to the discretion of the DC Paid Family Leave office. As employers, we do not make a decision on who is eligible or not, or comment on their eligibility. That is directly done by the officers at the DC Paid Family Leave office. So we would not be able to answer that question.
So and one of the questions about how to get DC their money, to put it bluntly, do we, the company, have to pay those taxes, or will our payroll provider, like ADP or Paychex, pay them on our behalf? So we know we've had some communication here at Marcum with both ADP and Paychex, and they have started the process of tracking all of this. So those will, we do know that ADP and Paychex will be handling the payment for that. The others, if you have different payroll providers, we do encourage you and recommend that you reach out to them and see how they are going to handle. A short answer is most payroll providers, if they are handling your unemployment submissions to DC, most likely they will also take care of this. But, you know, it's very prudent, and we do recommend that you reach out to your payroll provider to confirm that. Here's a question. If DOES is paying the employees for their paid family leave benefits and we, the employer, aren't providing a concurrently paid leave, how do we know when not to pay that employee? So again, this is kind of in a gray area, and it's a question, or we're looking at similar type of questions of how this exactly is administered. And I am going to say that we don't have a specific answer for you yet, but just know that it is something that we are looking into because we have that question as well.
We see another question about, are there directives on how much DC family leave an employee is entitled? We noticed in your scenarios you had several eligibility, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, etc. So for DC paid family leave, it falls into 3 categories. It falls into the family leave, the medical leave, and the personal leave. The family leave is 8 weeks, the personal leave is 2, and the medical leave is 6. So that's going to conclude the questions portion of our presentation. If you have any further questions, you're welcome to continue typing them in the chat and Q&A section, and we will be sure to record them and follow up after the presentation. Next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Erin, who will talk about where you get a copy of the presentation and how you can obtain the additional resources, as well as how you access the CPE credits for this webinar.
Great, thanks, Candace. So yes, there should be an additional resources tab on the toolbar, but if you're not seeing it, I will be sending out a copy of the presentation and the attachments, the additional resources that Candace had mentioned, post-event in an email. So you'll receive that, and you'll be able to download them as PDFs. You'll also receive an email later this week with a link to a survey, and in that survey, you will be asked for the code words for the presentation in order to receive CPE. So on your screen now are the specific code words that you will be asked. You will definitely be asked the first 3, the DC, the paid, and the family, but write them all down just in case. And you'll just be putting them into a field, and that will help process your CPE for the NASBA requirements. And so like Candace said, if we didn't get to any of your questions, we are compiling them all, and we will reply back to you post-event. We just want to make sure we have all the answers to everything before we get back to you on those.
And lastly, we'd just like to take a moment to thank you all for joining us on Marcum's Learning Community on DC Paid Family Leave. Should you have any further questions outside of this webinar, you are welcome to see our contact information in the presentation and follow up afterwards. Thank you.